Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to make a disco cowgirl vase using some of these 3D tumbler pieces from Dimensional Drinks. We're also going to use a tumbler from the Tipsy Magnolia. So I've got the sphere sleeve and the cowboy hat or cowgirl hat sleeve. And we're going to put these together on our tumbler to make a disco cowgirl. So to do this, I'm going to use my UV resin, and I'm going to start by adhering the cowboy hat to the disco ball sphere. So I just put a nice ring of that UV resin on the cowboy hat, and then I stuck the sphere down onto it. Now, as you can see, the hole for the sphere sleeve is a lot larger than the hole for the cowboy hat sleeve. So I'm trying to get these as centered as possible because I'm using a 24-ounce plump tumbler. I want to make sure that I have everything as centered as I can so that when we put that tumbler in there, it doesn't look wonky or off or anything. Once I have everything positioned how I like it, I'm going to cure everything with my UV lamp for about maybe 2-ish minutes. And once that's cured, we're going to really secure the bond now using the UV resin with our tumbler. So I'm going to stick my tumbler inside my sleeves, and I'm going to start by putting some UV resin up at the top of the tumbler, and I'm curing in tiny little sections. So I'm going to put a little bit of UV resin up at the top rim where the top of the cowboy hat meets the cup, and then with my hand I'm just going to brush that along the entire top of the tumbler to make sure that we get a really nice sealant with the UV resin and the cowboy hat so that nothing moves around or wiggles or anything like that. And once we've done that, we can start to fill in the gap down at the bottom of the tumbler where we've got a ton of space in between our tumbler and the outside of the sphere stand. So I'm going to cure this top portion, and then I'm going to move down to the bottom, and I'm just going to really fill that up with UV resin. We're going to really seal the edge a little bit later, so I'm not super worried about that right now because we're going to put so many layers of epoxy on this that it's really not going to go anywhere. But I wanted to add a little bit of UV resin just to get something on the bottom sticking to our tumbler, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to shove that in there and cure it under my lamp, and then we'll move on to the next step. After our UV resin is all cured, we can move on to reinforcing the bottom of the tumbler like I mentioned earlier. To do this, we're going to use Culture Sculpt. Now you can use clay, you can use the epoxy sculpt, whatever you have on hand or that you can get easily, it will be fine for this. You just don't want to use anything that you have to bake because I don't think that the sleeves can go in the oven. I'm not sure though, so don't quote me on either way. But what I'm going to do is use the Culture Sculpt. So I'm going to take equal parts of A and B, and I'm going to mix them together with my hands probably for about 5-ish minutes. And then we're going to have like an epoxy clay substance that we can use to fill in that bottom gap between the edge of our sleeve and our tumbler and make everything look really nice and seamless. So initially I thought that I would just fill in all of that gap with the Culture Sculpt, and then I thought that that would be a complete waste of the Culture Sculpt, and it would also make everything really heavy, and this is going to be super heavy as it is. So then I kind of pivot, and I figured I would just seal the edge rather than trying to fill everything in. So I'm taking the Culture Sculpt and I'm just forming a seal on the bottom, as you can see there, trying to smooth everything out and make it look like there was never a gap between the tumbler and the disco ball in the first place. Really just trying to blend this as best I can with the curve of the disco ball and the tumbler, trying to make everything seamless. This is not going to be perfect, obviously, because it's handmade and I am not a 3D expert. Like, I'm not super good with this kind of thing, so I'm really just doing my best. Also, keeping in mind that I'm going to cover all of this up with glitter and epoxy and mirror ball things, so this doesn't need to be super perfect. I'm just trying to do the best I can right now. All right, now that we've got everything attached to our tumbler, we can get into base painting and adding all of the fun parts. So starting out, I'm going to paint the cowboy hat with this really vibrant pink, and as always, I'm using way too much paint. That's just my style. Please don't use as much paint as me. You do not need all of it. So I'm going to get a really nice coat of this paint on the cowboy hat, and then we're going to move on and paint the rest of the tumbler. Of course, as always, I'm using my favorite brand of acrylic paint, the Delta Creative Ceramcoat brand. You can get it at Target or Joann's or on Amazon. Once I finish the cowboy hat, I'm going to move on to the disco ball, and I'm just going to paint that a very basic gray color. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to paint the bottom of the tumbler, and then up at the top above the cowboy hat where I already painted pink. I decided I wanted to paint that a different color, just kind of have it match the bottom portion of the tumbler. So I'm going to paint both of those areas with a really bright turquoise aqua acrylic paint. Once our paint is dry, it's time to start adding our glitter. So to adhere my first round of glitter, I'm going to use the Flint Sister Supply Shop Fast Cure Epoxy. I'm going to mix equal parts A and B as always, mix that together for about maybe 5 minutes. I did mix a little bit more than usual. I'm using this on some other projects, so you don't need this much. I think I mixed like 20 milliliters, but you maybe need maximum 5 because we're just going to glitter right now the top and bottom portions of the tumbler, so you really need like maybe 1 milliliter. You don't need 5, but you can't mix up 1 milliliter. So anyway, I'm going to mix this up really well and then add a super thin layer to the turquoise portions of our tumbler, and then we're going to go in with our glitter. And of course, I'm using my favorite glitter. This and Barbie are my 2 favorite glitters of all time, Kaneohe. I let that first layer of epoxy dry for about 3 to 4 hours, and now I'm ready to move on to my next glittering step, which is our cowgirl hat. Again, I'm going to use the Flint Sister Supply Shop Fast Cure Epoxy, and I'm going to use my other favorite glitter of all time, Barbie. Before I start with my epoxy and glitter for the cowboy hat, I am going to mask off the top glittered section as well as down onto the disco ball area. Now the disco ball area doesn't really matter too much because again, all of that's going to get covered up with some mirror ball pieces later, so we don't really need to worry too much about it, but I wanted that area to be as smooth as possible for adding the disco ball pieces later, so I did try my best to mask that bottom portion off as well, but if you want to skip that step, you probably could and you'd be totally fine. Now for this epoxy layer, I'm going to use a little bit more than you typically would think of using for an epoxy method glitter application. I want to use more epoxy because I want the epoxy to soak up my glitter just a little bit. That's going to help everything lie really flat and help all of my epoxy coats go on really smoothly. It's really going to lessen the amount of sanding I'll have to do later. And with something like this, I don't want to spend a lot of time sanding, so I wanted the glitter to soak up in the epoxy, or for the epoxy to soak up the glitter, I guess is what you would say, so that I could have a really nice smooth finish, but also still have a really sparkly outcome. So I'm going to use a little bit more epoxy than you would think, and I'm going to spread it all over the cowboy hat on the top, bottom, every little nook and cranny that I can get it into, and then we'll go in and cover the entire cowgirl hat with Barbie. Immediately after glittering, I'm going to go through and remove all of that masking tape that I put down, and then I'm going to let my cup sit and dry overnight, and once it's totally dry, we'll be able to add our first real coat of epoxy over all of this glitter. Now, because I'm extra and I'm also a little paranoid, I'm going to take my epoxy and I'm going to mix a little bit of special edition flurries into it so that I can have a nice sparkly background on this disco ball for any holes or spots that we might leave a little open when we put those mirror ball pieces on. This is the same technique that I'll use when I do a rhinestone tumbler. I always like to put down a sparkly base first because any gaps in your stones or your disco ball pieces or whatever will not look so patchy if you have a sparkly base underneath, if that makes sense. It kind of helps fill in those gaps and make everything look really nice and full coverage, even if you missed a couple spots along the way. Now for this coat as well, I'm still using the Fast Cure epoxy from Flint Sisters Supply Shop, and I want to say I used probably like between 40 and 50 milliliters of it on my cup. Now I think I might have used a little bit more because it was starting to warm up a lot and I was kind of panicking. I didn't want it to flash cure on me, so I think I used a little bit more, just trying to get a nice smooth even coat. So for this I would recommend using the Artist Cure epoxy, which is the regular setting one. It'll give you a little bit of a longer working time and you won't have to stress out about using a Fast Cure in million-degree weather. So use the Artist Cure. But anyway, I'm going to put that on the disco ball and then I'm going to cover the rest of the tumbler with the same epoxy and glitter mixture as well. And I found that it was a lot easier to take the cup off my turner and just apply all the epoxy by hand. I found that I could really get in all of those nooks and crannies if I was just holding it and controlling it rather than trying to put the epoxy on while the cup was spinning on my turner. But whatever technique is easier for you, you just want to get a nice, smooth, even layer of epoxy all over this entire thing. After that first coat of epoxy is cured, I'm going to go in and do a little bit of sanding. Now when I cleaned up the top rim, I did have a few little areas of the glitter chip off a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about fixing those because I'm going to use this as a vase, so that area you're really not even going to see. I'm keeping this for myself, so I don't really care about that top rim portion. But if I were using this as a tumbler, or if I were going to sell this to somebody or give it to somebody, I would just go in and paint that little section, cover it with the same glitter, and then epoxy over it as normal. Just do a little patch job. After a couple coats of epoxy, you won't even be able to tell that you did that, but I'm not going to do that on mine because I just didn't really care to be honest. So now with my 6 Secret sanding block, I'm going to sand down all of these glitter sections and try to get them as smooth as I can. I'm really trying to minimize the number of coats of epoxy that I do on this because I don't want this to be either super thick or super duper heavy. So I'm trying to get everything as smooth as I can and not do a lot of coats of epoxy. So that's why I'm sanding after just one coat. I was confident enough in I was confident enough in my coat's thickness that I wasn't going to ruin any of the glitter underneath, but typically I would always recommend doing 2 coats of epoxy over glitter before you do any sanding. After sanding, I gave my new vase a nice little washing with some dish soap and water to get all of the sanding residue off, and then I added another thin coat of epoxy just to shine the glitter back up again. And once that second coat of epoxy is cured, we can move into what I think is the best part of this, is like really bringing everything to life. This is also the hardest part. I messed up on this probably 3, maybe 4 times, where I put some of these little pieces down and then I had to take them all off because they weren't looking right. So I would advise that you really just take your time, go slowly, come up with a plan before you just willy-nilly go in with these mirror pieces, because you don't want to have to scrape them all off like I did. Shout out to my mom, Manny, and my fiance, Brandon, for taking these pieces off when I brought them this vase, saying, please, can you help me take these off? So they both helped me out in taking the pieces off because I was losing my mind. But anyway, we're going to start putting these pieces on, and I got these really cool sheets on Amazon, and they're sheets of mirror ball, so you could use these whole sheets on a lot of different things, but because I'm using a sphere, I had to break these up into little stripes. So you're gonna see me kind of peel up stripe by stripe and then place those on one by one. And I will tell you, this took me a long time. It took me an even longer time with all of the mistakes I made. So again, take your time, turn on a podcast, listen to a book, watch a TV show. This is kind of like rhinestoning. It's not quite the same because you're not placing each square down individually one by one, but it's still very tedious and it is difficult, I will admit that. But it was so worth it and I love the final result. So if you want to do this, highly recommend it. Just go in knowing it's going to take you a while and it's going to be hard. So this was one of my first mistakes. I tried initially to put the whole sheet on just to see what would happen, so had to take that off. Then after I did that, I thought, well, maybe I'll go down vertically and do that. And I got a few rows in and realized that it wasn't looking the way I wanted to. And then I looked at a disco ball that I had and realized I should have just been going horizontally stripe by stripe this whole time. So I put all of these on vertically, and then I had my mom take it off so that I could start over going stripe by stripe horizontally around the sphere to create the disco ball. Once we had all those disco ball pieces on, we are all done. So here is the final vase result. I added a few fake flowers to the top and then put it in my office on my bookshelf so I can look at it every day. Now, she is definitely not perfect if you look up close and you really inspect my craftsmanship, but that's okay. I love how it turned out and I had so much freaking fun making this. It really challenged me, pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I ended up with something that I'm really, really proud of and really happy with, and I can't wait to look at every single day. So I really hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know, of course, what you think down below in the comments. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button down below. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos, and thank you all so much for watching as always. I love you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, love you, bye! Hello friends, thanks so much for watching this video. I want to say a huge special thank you to my elite fam, my channel members, and my subscribers. You all make this channel possible, so thank you so much for being part of the fam. If you want more exclusive content from me, you can join my elite fam at patreon.com/elitefam. You can find my tumblers and digital files on my website, madebymalstudio.com. And if you'd like to follow me on social media, you can find me on Instagram at madebymal_studio. Here's another video for you to check out, and I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Love you. Bye.